Hello aviators, Sky here, and we are once again going into the era of mega ambitious aviators, who created devices that look more like Star Wars characters than real airplanes. But as history shows, sometimes even mega ambitions are not enough to win in the eternal confrontation with, reality. And while the Archangel A-12 was a breakthrough which was more or less realized, and the YF-12 was on the verge of common sense, our today's hero can be an excellent illustration of the term overkill. Introducing the ultra-high-speed reconnaissance aircraft carrying the ultra-high-speed reconnaissance aircraft, the Lockheed M-21 and Lockheed D-21. The history of the D-21 program began in 1960, after the U-2 high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft was shut down over the USSR. At that time, its successor, the supersonic A-12, was already being created. But despite the outstanding flight characteristics, disputes arose even then about how safely it would be to fly in tightly protected airspaces. Yes, the A-12 is fast and high altitude, but a missile is a missile, and Soviet air defenses continue to develop at a frantic pace. In addition, the U-2 is one thing. For all the scandals with Gary Powers, his plane was technologically quite a simple machine, and the Soviet engineers who received its wreckage did not find out anything particularly useful. But if, under the same scenario, the revolutionary A-12 fell into their hands, for the Americans it would be not good. Observing and in fact participating in this dispute, the Lockheed skunkworks that created the A-12 came up with a solution. The idea was that since the Archangel cannot fly into the active counteraction zone of air defense, then let a special unmanned reconnaissance aircraft do it. Such a drone was supposed to be delivered to the border on a modified A-12, launched in the air and fly deep into the enemy territory, after which it would again go into a safe zone, drop a capsule with the recorded data, and self-destruct. In theory, this was a completely working option that could reopen the sky for the CIA, and Lockheed, realizing that production would not hold for a long time on the Archangels alone, stubbornly looked for ways to diversify the line. The project was developing quite quickly, and by 1962, a full-size mock-up was ready. However, the CIA looked at this with skepticism, putting a clear priority on the A-12, which they did not yet receive. But then the Air Force got involved, which initially ignored the whole program and now straight up fell in love, already waiting for the YF-12 interceptors and ordering their own scouts, the future SR-71. Meanwhile, the military saw in the project not only an unmanned reconnaissance aircraft, but also potentially a cruise missile. This was a plus for both the CIA and Lockheed. The former got a partner who shares risks and costs, and the latter finally got the order. So, what is this thing exactly? The unmanned reconnaissance aircraft, which received the design index Q12, was, one might say, a direct relative of the A-12 in terms of airframe design. It also became a tailless aircraft with a small fin, delta wing, and leading-edge extensions. The materials were similar to the progenitor, mainly titanium with the addition of radio-absorbing structural elements. Its power plant was of course different. To put a huge and expensive J-58 on, in fact, a disposable device would be a wild waste. And it was not necessary. The drone had to be launched from the modified A-12 at high speeds, which means that in its turbo ramjet power plant, the turbo was not necessary. The Q-12 received the RJ-43 ramjet engine, originally designed for the Boeing CIM-10 Mach air defense missile. The engine also has an air intake cone, which, with the overall design of the fairing, makes it similar to the J-58, but this similarity is actually purely external. This scheme and power plant were supposed to give the 5-ton vehicle the ability to fly at a speed of Mach 3.5 at altitudes of up to 29 kilometers, 95,000 feet. At such speeds and altitudes with stealth technology and very modest dimensions, 13 meters or 42 feet in length, the aircraft was expected to become an extremely difficult target for any means of interception. And even its falling into the hands of the enemy did not promise serious losses of technology. The Q-12 retained the futuristic nature of the Archangel, but was a much simpler machine. Meanwhile, the flight range of up to 5,600 kilometers, 3,000 miles, would allow, in combination with the carrier, to decently increase the range of reconnaissance flights. In terms of equipment, it was even tougher than with the A-12. As if the enormous operating temperatures were not enough, constant vibration and a terrible lack of space were added here. The Q-12 was technically a cruise missile, most of the volume of which was occupied by fuel and the engine. Meanwhile, a drone is a drone. It had to be equipped with decent automation, which allowed it to perform a significant number of operations independently and according to pre-recorded programs. The flattened niche in the lower part of the nose was created for the photographic equipment. Moreover, this niche was a separate module, which would be detached after the completion of the mission. It was supposed to be picked up in the air by the JC-130 aircraft while descending on a parachute, and in the case of failure, already on the ground or on the water. The module remained buoyant. Approximately the same material pickup scheme was being developed at that time for the Corona program, only there the capsule was falling all the way from space. In 1963, after receiving all the approvals, the program finally got its name, Tagboard. The name of the project is not too pretentious, but the indices are cute. The modification of the A-12, which was supposed to act as a carrier, was named M-21, from the word mother, and the Q-12 was renamed D-21, respectively daughter. The modification of the carriers themselves did not imply large-scale changes, and most of the decisions had already been worked out, to one degree or another, when creating the relatives. The main differences from the A-12 were the operator's cabin, located behind the cockpit as on the YF-12, and the large pylon on the fuselage on which the D-21 was installed. The pylon was equipped with locks and pneumatic pushers for launching the drone, as well as a pipeline for refueling and circulating fuel, which, like in the carrier, was used for cooling. The terrible overheating factor in flight did not go anywhere. This placement also had a problem. On the one hand, with this configuration, the fins of the carrier tilted inward turned out to be very close to the wingtips of the drone, which was fraught with a collision. On the other hand, where else will you put it? They had to work out an extremely thorough launch procedure. For testing and the early stages of future reconnaissance, Lockheed manufactured two M-21 aircraft, which began test flights at the end of 1964. Initially, to improve aerodynamics in flight, the D-21 was equipped with fairings on the nose and tail, as was later done for transporting the shuttles, but in practice, this created more problems than benefits. While the tail fairings simply separated and flew back, the front one, having separated, threatened to hit the drone itself, and given the speed, the flight would have ended there, so the fairings were abandoned. The first test launch was carried out in the spring of 1966, and the risks of such configuration immediately showed themselves. The D-21 did not immediately leave the carrier, and at supersonic speed, its slightest incorrect displacement could lead to a collision. The crew was clearly nervous. The following launches were more successful, and the drone was lifted to 27 kilometers, 90,000 feet, and accelerated to Mach 3.3, 3,600 kilometers per hour. Already not bad. However, the success did not last long. During the fourth test in the summer of 1966, at the moment of launch, the drone had an engine failure and, having lost control, hit the carrier. At a speed of more than Mach 3, this led to the rapid destruction of both aircraft. The crew managed to eject, but after splashdown into the sea, the injured operator drowned. The investigation led to the conclusion that such a placement of the drone was too dangerous, and given that there was no other way to dock the D-21 and M-21, this meant that the project was being cancelled. At this sad moment, perhaps someone asked the question, if all the reconnaissance work in fact is done by a Mach 3 drone, why do we need a Mach 3 carrier at all, whose task is simply to deliver it to the launch point? While the D-21 could not be placed above the fuselage of the M-21, under the wing of the B-52 it felt much more confident. Fortunately, it was not the first time for the Stratofortress to carry something interesting. However, the ramjet engine nevertheless required very high speeds at the start, which the B-52 obviously could not provide, so an intermediate solid propellant booster had to be used, docked to the drone from below and detached after gaining the required speed. The program used two B-52s, each being able to carry two modified D-21Bs. Test launches began in the fall of 1967, and they were not particularly successful. The summer test of 1968 was a full-fledged success, when the drone gained altitude and speed, flew along a given route, self-destructed, and the module with useful data was undocked and picked up by the military. Everything went by the book. Despite the not entirely clear prospects of the D-21, they nevertheless decided to test it in real conditions as part of reconnaissance flights over the Chinese nuclear test site Lop Nor, conducted from 1969 to 1971. The results were not so hot. Of the 4 flights, not one ended up being successful. For the first time, the D-21 passed over China, but did not turn around and flew into the USSR. Tupolev even developed the Voron or Raven UAV based on it, but it didn't go further than sketches. The second flight was successful, but the data module did not deploy its parachute and crashed into the sea. For the third time, the parachutes were released, but it was not possible to catch it in the air, and the destroyer that arrived at the place of descent into the sea ran into it and sank it. Finally, when after the 4th attempt the drone fell in China, it was decided to end this parade of absurdity. In 1971, the program was closed. Reconnaissance flights were stopped, a stage of great friendship between the United States and China began, the Air Force abandoned the program and retained only the SR-71, and the CIA finally decided to give the risky reconnaissance to satellites. A total of 38 drones were built for both the M-21 and B-52, of which 21 were used and the rest went to storage facilities and museums. The surviving M-21, after the completion of the flight program, went to the Museum of Flight in Seattle, where it happily flaunts with the D-21 drone on its back to this day. The game of daughters and mothers for Lockheed was unsuccessful. Well, not everything works out after all. This concludes our today's story, and while we are approaching the culmination of the high-speed marathon, like and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to watch the videos early, see some exclusive behind-the-scenes content, or just support the channel, consider joining our Patreon community. Fast and successful flights and soft landings to you.